I just got this book that was my partner's great grandmother's. It's called The Complete Book of Science. And it's literally this thick, and like no science has happened since then. But it's full of these bizarre images. Like almost every image in there is totally magnetic, and then I'm receiving it, and like so much has changed, and like everything that they're like, that's it, science is done, has like totally shifted. And we're on to like smartphones and stuff like that. So I just think like I'm interested in figuring and research through my practice, even though it's more play than like I'm sure they would like to imagine about what they were doing back in the Complete Book of Science days. But I think that there's like a similar energy of unfolding and learning through a process. I went to Hugh Oaks on a residency, and I didn't bring anything with me, or I like thought I brought a ton, and then I got there and I was like, oh wow, I brought like a ton if I was suddenly a painter and not a sculptor, which I dabble, but I was like, I can't make anything, so I went to the hardware store every single day, and I I went to the hardware store every day, and at first they're like, what are you getting? Because I was like getting foam and wire and like those orange things that you put at the end of your driveway so a snowplow doesn't hit your curb, and they had no idea what I was up to, and then I said I was with Hugh Oaks, and they're like, obviously, okay, this makes sense. I'd been collecting these vintage photographs of natural elements and queer content for years, and I just had them, and I didn't know what I was going to do with them. They were like, they seemed precious to me in a way where I didn't want to use them. I didn't want to like not have them anymore. And so, but when I was at Hugh Oaks, those were one of the things that I brought, like one of the 5 things I brought. And so I ended up using them to surface the sculpture that I made, and I'm so happy I did. And that was I have these, and I need to figure out like what to finally do with them. And I think like a lot of the reason why I choose the images that I work with has to do with like a little bit of what I'm looking to do with some of my works, where I want to leave the viewer confused. Like I'll see this image and I'm like, this is so bizarre. I have no idea what's going on here, and like I can't make heads or tails of it. And I'm so interested to like, in my way, figure it out. When I was in undergrad, I first started working with queerness as some conceptual content within my work, and it wasn't until I had a professor who was queer that I felt like comfortable in kind of pursuing that as content. And I'm sure a lot of that had to do with like internalized homophobia, all the fun things that come with being a queer youth. But I finally started touching or started working with that in a way that felt very like therapeutic and cathartic and autobiographical, like very like from my diary. And I wanted to kind of move past just my experience a little bit. And when I started at MECA in my grad program, I was working with my experience still, and that was it started to feel less, therapeutic and more just like relying on that content, and in a way that I knew there was more that I could like kind of dig into. And when I wasn't making work that had to do with some kind of queer theme, I noticed that I was making work that had to do with some kind of like nature element. And it wasn't until the summer before my last year at MECA that I learned about queer ecology and kind of the merging of queerness and ecology. And that really fascinated me. Just like looking at nature through a queer lens and what that has to offer the world. And so that sparked my interest, and that's kind of, I was like very strong in trying to like define queer ecology through my work, and now it's something that I feel like not the same way of like making work that's autobiographical, but in a similar vein, like I feel like I I have really dug into that, and now it's okay to let that like be something that informs the work rather than my work being a translation of this concept. Just kind of this idea of figuring out how life works and like really honoring it and being excited by that. I think just kind of that idea of learning and through like play almost. Queer ecology is like this really neat facet of ecological theory. Essentially, it's just asking us to re-envision how we interact with the world and do so through a queer lens. So it doesn't necessarily have to be like queers in sexual identity. It could be queers in like just like strange, bizarre, different. And it can overlap. And so a lot of my work has been like more so in school, trying to illustrate that idea of like working with nature, collaborating, and trying to imagine different alternative realities to the world that we're in. My work takes that kind of idea of collaboration and kind of shifts it more to just like a desire to know and like understand. There's a painting that I haven't started yet, but I have stretched the canvas for. And I'm planning on having the content be about Himalayan balsam seed pods because I think that they're so fascinating. I went to my partner's parents' house and they have these Himalayan balsams all over, and you touch them and they explode in this like very dramatic way. I like to think of them as like organic fireworks, and that to me feels like a very queer like element in nature. This means of like exploding so triumphantly and like trying to repopulate or reproduce via this very like dramatic way. I guess a lot of queerness in nature really does come from our understanding of nature, you know, because like to the creature itself, it's not queer, and to the other creatures in its environment, it's not unnatural, unnormal, or any of those uns, but because it's something that we're not used to, it feels like a queer object. So the fiddle leaf fig tree, that one, it kind of began as a self-portrait, and so it has a little earring on it, and all of the leaves are printed on just printer paper, but they're images I found of fiddle leaf leaves online. And the banana that sits on the Home Depot bucket is it's a banana that I opened up and laid on my studio floor and shot an aerial photo and then refolded back together. So it's all paper except for the Home Depot bucket and the stick and the concrete. But yeah, I was interested in taking that kind of language of digital and bringing it physical. I started doing that when I came to grad school. That was a new thing here. And I'd always been interested in photography and sculpture, and I'd been interested in marrying those two, and I didn't know how, because sculpture is so three-dimensional and photography is so two-dimensional, or less if on a computer. And so just trying to figure that out was like a big challenge that I've been working with, and then taking that forward to Wet Your Whistle, which is this rock form that I also made at Hugh Noakes. I came back here and finished, and it's sitting on top of this photograph, this vintage photograph that I had from this Charles Hicks photo book about working out. It's very saucy. It's this guy sipping water out of like one of those classic Dixie cups with like the teal and the magenta swirly design on the side, and there's this dehydrated plant on the top. I tend to want to work larger. I find that lately, besides my new piece, my pieces have been like kind of like this, so maybe more medium. But working at that scale, I've never been able to make a small sculpture that I've been excited about. And I was driving over here thinking about that because, well, that's a whole different tangent. But I was thinking about how I don't really make small sculptures and how I'm drawn to making these like more bodily sized sculptures that really challenge me to to conceptualize how to make them, whatever. And I think that the image adds like that small element that the larger pieces could lack, or at least it brings people in more. So like they see it and they're interested in the form, and then there are those details that you can get lost in. And allowing for the works to be a confusing thing is kind of nice, because we have this desire to know everything, and that's like a lot of what my work is about. And allowing for something to remain confusing in an age where that's not always the case is really satisfying, I feel.